Let's look at the combat application tourniquet. It's provided in what's called a self-application mode. There is a large elastic band that is routed through a buckle that has 2 slots. One slot you only need to use for applying to an upper extremity. The second slot you'll need to use in addition to be able to apply enough force for it to stay on a large part of an extremity like the upper thigh. The windlass mechanism is this bar that you turn and crank to provide that circumferential tension that is closing down the extremity and pinching that artery against the bone. It has a retention mechanism to hold the windlass in place once you've reached your end point turning it, the end point again being you've stopped the bright red pulsatile bleeding, and then it has a securing tab to further help keep the windlass mechanism in place. Once you've applied the tourniquet, one of the important aspects of securing the tourniquet is that it's going to stay in place until the casualty gets where he's going to a higher level of medical authority. The health.mil website with the TCCC section on it contains videos that show you step by step how to self-apply and how to buddy apply a CAT to the upper and lower extremity. I'm not going to reteach those points, but we are going to talk about some general principles of tourniquet application, and we're going to use the CAT to demonstrate it. The CAT's provided in a self-application mode. Applying it to the upper extremity, it is perfectly acceptable to place the injured arm through the loop. The self-application storage mode means that the free running end is passed through the single slot of the buckle closest to where it's attached. Wherever the site of injury is, we want the tourniquet to be at least 2 finger breadths or 2 inches above the site of injury. A very common question. Go ahead and relax for a second. Doc, why don't we just put the tourniquet as high as possible on the extremity so we don't have any issue where we might need to apply a second tourniquet? A very obvious question, and the answer is this. No matter what we're doing in medicine, when we're doing procedures, surgical procedures, minor procedures, whatever, the basic principle is first, do no harm. Though we've documented very well that a properly applied tourniquet simply does not result in the loss of a limb, we always plan for the worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario? That wherever we apply that tourniquet, that it has to stay on longer than we would like. And suppose that wherever we have applied that tourniquet, that is where the limb is going to die. That is where I am going to perform the amputation. Therefore, if we put a tourniquet 2 inches above the site of bleeding as opposed to all the way up on the extremity, every centimeter of limb that I can save is important for the function of that person's extremity and the prosthesis that we may be able to fit them with. Worst case scenario, if we apply a tourniquet at this level and the limb dies and I have to amputate him here, this much limb left is much better than me having to do a shoulder disarticulation and leave him with no limb. That is why we do not automatically apply a tourniquet to the highest possible level up to the shoulder or up to the groin on the lower extremity for our first application of a tourniquet. I hope that explained that issue. Applying the tourniquet about 2 finger breadths or 2 inches above the level of the injury, What makes the tourniquet effective is getting all the slack out of the free running end. So when self-applying, you're going to pull that tourniquet as tight as humanly possible, and we're going to emphasize getting as much of the hook pile tape in contact with each other to maximize the surface area to try and maintain the tourniquet in place. I hope I didn't commit a verbal tragedy and that makes sense. The guideline that will help you know, do I have the tourniquet on tight enough on the limb at this point, is if you can't fit a finger underneath the loop of the tourniquet, you've got it on tight enough. If you can easily get a finger in under there, you need to get it tighter. The reason is this. The windlass mechanism, which is going to tighten the tourniquet, only has so many useful revolutions in it. The tighter you start with the tourniquet secured, the less revolutions of the windlass you'll have to provide to stop the bleeding. We're going to keep this a little bit loose for demonstration purposes because we like Mike. For self-application mode, go right ahead, brother. He's going to turn it until he gets to the point where the bright red pulsatile bleeding has stopped. He's going to secure it into the securing device. With the cat at this point on the upper extremity, he's going to take the free running end, he's going to thread it through the securing device for extra retention ability, and then he's going to take the retention tab, secure it. That's a tourniquet that will stay in place during transport. That tourniquet is in place. Let's go ahead and loosen this. And let's just stop at this point. Yep, right here for you. All right. Rule number 1 of tourniquets. Tourniquets hurt. There is no question that a properly applied tourniquet is going to cause significant pain. How do we overcome this? Well, we overcome it with knowledge. Number 1 is in training. We train people to be able to experience what a correctly applied tourniquet feels like. And this is the manner that you can practice at home to help understand this. The end point of applying the tourniquet is when we've stopped the bright red bleeding. But how do we know when that has been achieved in training? Easy. We're trying to obliterate the distal pulse. The radial pulse is located on the palm side of the distal wrist. This bone along your thumb is known as the radius. The artery that runs along that is called the radial artery. Just about where the distal wrist crease meets your forearm, if you use the soft portions of your booger picking finger and your social finger, if you put that right over that soft spot and press in slightly, you'll learn where the radial pulse is. In training, this is what we do in buddy pairs, is have each partner learn to feel the radial pulse on the partner on whom he's applying the tourniquet. When he is sure that he knows where the radial pulse is, then we have them tighten down the windlass. We have them give it a crank. We have them feel for the radial pulse. And if they can still feel the pulse, like I can on Mike, it's time to give it another revolution. We have them do that to the point where the distal pulse has been obliterated. That is how we reproduce in training how tight the tourniquet needs to be. And universally, by the time we have reached that endpoint, the person on whom the tourniquet has been applied is in significant pain. You don't need to keep it on there for very long. but anybody should be able to tolerate that tourniquet application for at least a minute or two to understand what it feels like to have a properly applied tourniquet placed on their upper or lower extremity. Tourniquets are going to cause pain. There is no way around it. You have to use that knowledge to tell the casualty, this is saving your life. We'll get the Medicare soon. We'll get you some pain medication. We'll do whatever we can. But brother, we have to have that on there right now or you are going to die. You have to communicate with somebody and let them know what they are experiencing, particularly if they have not received proper training prior to this incident. If you can self-apply the CAT, applying it to your buddy is even easier. Some slight differences when we're applying it to the lower extremity. Thighs are so big that you simply have to loop the free running end through both slots in the buckle because you can't generate enough tension around the thigh to keep the tourniquet in place. So one of the primary differences between applying it to your upper and lower extremity is, number one, you can't fit somebody's leg through this loop coming out of the TQ holder in the self-application mode. Take the free running end completely out of the buckle and then apply it around their lower extremity. Loop it through both slots in the buckle. Get it as tight as you can in the same manner until you can't get a finger underneath the tourniquet. Secure as much of the hook pile tape as you can. You will not have enough to make a complete wraparound into the retention mechanism. And then apply revolutions to the windlass until you have obliterated the bright red pulsatile bleeding. It's really as simple as that. Hey, let's take a minute now and talk about two of the other primary tourniquets that we see on the scene. Mike, do you want to lead us through that?
Sure. Right now I want to discuss the TK4. It's made by H&H Associates. Some advantages to the TK4 are that it's very compact and relatively lightweight. So when you're doing low profile ops or if you need to stuff a couple extra tourniquets in your bag, it's always good to go with something like the TK4 because it's so low profile. Right now I want to show you how it's applied. It's fairly simple. It can be applied in a self-aid scenario, but I'm going to show you the buddy aid scenario right now. What I want to do is locate one of the hooks and wrap it around the main body of the tourniquet. Just as with the CAT, I want to pull as much slack out of the tourniquet before I start the main portion of application so that I can't get that single finger under there. I can go a little bit tighter, but for this exercise, I'll leave it a little slack because we do like dock. Then as I wrap it, I want to make sure that I'm pulling all the stretch out of the elastic and make wraps around the main body of the tourniquet. Every time I take a stop to reposition my hand on the tourniquet, I want to make sure I'm pulling all of the elastic out of that so that it can maximize the amount of force that's being applied to that underlying tissue so that we can completely obstruct blood flow to that extremity, thus not losing any more blood out of that wound. Once I've gotten to the end, if you can lower your arm, I'll secure the hook, and I'll show you on the front side. I want to secure the hook under as many wraps of the tourniquet as I can so that it doesn't come loose during transport. If necessary, the outer hook can be secured with duct tape in order to make sure that it doesn't come undone during transport, but we do want to make sure that we constantly reassess our patient and our interventions to make sure that nothing's changed during our transport. The next tourniquet that we want to talk about is the Soft T. This is made by TacMed Solutions. Another great tourniquet, similar in design to the CAT. It uses a windlass style device in order to apply pressure. So we'll apply it over the arm, making sure that we're above our side of the wound. pull the strap tight until we have not enough slack in order to get a finger under the tourniquet. And then we will turn the windlass in order to apply pressure to that tissue, thus stopping the flow of blood to the extremity so that we do not lose precious blood out of the wound site. We'll secure the end of the windlass in the securing triangle. Once we've tightened down the windlass sufficiently to stop the flow of arterial blood from the wound site, we'll secure it with the securing triangle, and then we'll follow up by securing the thumb screw at the latch here to make sure that the free end of our strap does not come loose during transport.
The next issue that we should cover: where should you have your tourniquet? Our opinions on this are extremely specific. TCCC doctrine doesn't specify where you should have a tourniquet. This is my opinion. A tourniquet must be in a position where it can be accessed by you or somebody treating you. We insist that people come to training with a tourniquet somewhere on or near the midline of their gear. It is preferable that the tourniquet be identified by some kind of symbology, a little cross, a little group of letters that says TQ, or it should be obvious in some way by how it's mounted that that's what it is. It does no good to have a tourniquet somewhere on your body that only you can find it. I am using your tourniquet to treat you. If I roll up on you and I need to apply a tourniquet and I can't find it on you because you carry it on your back or you carry it in your pocket or it's in a magazine pouch that's not marked, you're the one who is losing precious blood. Carrying the tourniquet somewhere towards the midline of your body, making it obvious, lets me treat you more effectively. Let's talk a little bit about tourniquet carriers. I don't care what tourniquet carrier you use. Once again, the mission drives the gear. I have no problem with somebody showing up to one of our classes with a TQ rubber banded to the front of their rig. That's fine. But we have to realize there's some limitations to that. Rubber bands are not going to last a long time. They're easily breakable. It's something you have to expect frequently. If you're using that kind of a setup to store your tourniquet on your rig, you simply need to realize that it's going to have to be inspected and replaced frequently. I don't think it's appropriate for an officer who has to keep his plate carrier in his trunk where it's going to be exposed to heat and adverse weather for a long period of time, but I think you can get away with it for a 3 or 4 day course with us. Some kind of formal tourniquet carrier is preferable, and there's certainly many. So let's briefly look at and talk about some of these different prefab tourniquet carriers. The Blue Force Gear Tourniquet Now is an excellent tourniquet carrier. It's certainly better than rubber bands. It's very easy to attach to MOLLE webbing. The tourniquet is exposed. That means it's easy for us to see when you're wearing it. But again, the downside is it doesn't protect the tourniquet well in an adverse environment. It is an excellent tourniquet carrier. Other tourniquet carriers that give a little more protection to the tourniquet are sometimes desirable. This is a Mars. It comes with symbology that identifies the contents as medical, and most specifically a tourniquet. It's easily accessed, and it provides a little higher level of protection for the tourniquet inside. Some tourniquets, like the combat application tourniquet, that depend on Velcro, the hook pile tape, for its utility and usefulness, need a higher level of protection depending upon the environment you're in. This is a tourniquet carrier from First Spear that completely encloses the tourniquet, and that's a desirable feature for the cat. I use a admin pouch that contains a space for a Leatherman, or in my case, a tourniquet. It puts it in a place that's very accessible to me, and it's easily visualized by anybody who's looking at the front of my plate carrier looking for a tourniquet. Whatever tourniquet you use, whatever carrier system you use, have it mounted where somebody else can find it and see it and know how to use the tourniquet that you carry. Finally, I'd like to take just a second and talk about carrying a second tourniquet, or as many tourniquets as you feel is necessary to support what you're doing. Carrying a second tourniquet is never a bad idea. Some tourniquets, like the TK4, because they're particularly small in size, are extremely easy to pack in a shirt pocket, a pants pocket. The idea is that you should have as many tourniquets in as many places as you think you might need them. Carrying a second tourniquet. I wear a tourniquet holder on my war belt as well, so that if I'm wearing my war belt and not my plate carrier, I still have a tourniquet mounted in a reliable, repeatable place that I can find. This is a Kydex tourniquet holder for a cat made by 1110 Industries. It provides me good access to the tourniquet. It's marked so that somebody else can recognize what it is. It's very easy to access. The bottom line is, sometimes 2 is 1 and 1 is none. Having an extra tourniquet, or as many as you think is necessary,